Is being built. Exactly what is being repeated? It is really puzzling to me that having just buried one monster, the Soviet Union, another remarkably similar one, the European Union, is being built. Exactly what is the European Union? Perhaps by examining the Soviet version, we can get the answer. The Soviet Union was governed by 15 unelected people who appointed each other and who were not accountable to anyone. The European Union is governed by 2,000 people who appoint each other, meet in secret, and are not accountable to anyone, and whom we cannot sack. One might say that the EU has an elected parliament. Well, the Soviet Union had a parliament of a sort too, the Supreme Soviet. We just rubber stamp the political decisions, pretty much like the European Parliament does, where speaking time in the chamber is limited within each group and often amounts to 1 minute per speaker. In the EU, there are hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats with their huge salaries, their staff, servants, bonuses, and privileges, their lifelong immunity from prosecution, which is simply shuffled from one position to another, no matter what they do or fail to do. Is this not exactly what the Soviet Union did? The Soviet Union was created by coercion and very often with a military occupation. The European Union is being created, admittedly not by armed force, but by coercion and economic bullying. In order to continue to exist, the Soviet Union spread itself further and further. The moment it stopped spreading, it started collapsing. And I suspect the same is true of the European Union.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so this is a Russian Soviet dissident who fled to the West, to Great Britain. So you can see this is quite old. This is 15 years old, this video. And he died, this man died, I think a year or two ago, maybe before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, he finally died. He's a controversial figure, of course. During the Cold War, anybody that rejected the Soviet Union automatically got positive reception in the media, but he got into trouble because he evidently was found with child pornography on his, somehow in possession of child pornography. So he's claiming in this old video that the European Union was a new version of the Soviet Union. And of course, he makes statements about the European Union, that it consists of hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats, which is not true. There's only, somewhere around 30,000 people work for the European Union. He makes statements about the European Parliament not having real power. The European Parliament, as you'll read next week, the European Parliament forced the European Commission to resign under Jacques Santer. So he's a nationalist. He's an intense Russian nationalist, and nationalists tend to see the world in nationalistic ways, which is in terms of threats, perceived diabolical, stereotypical threats and opportunities for their nation. And international organizations that are not centered on promoting a nation's particular interests are not considered legitimate. So, but of course, he's not alone in making those statements when he was alive. And many people in Brexit supporting the United Kingdom's leaving the European Union made similar statements. Perhaps, again, the most notorious individual in this regard was Nigel Farage, who built his entire career since he entered the European Parliament in 1979, when European Parliament first began having elections. Nigel Farage used the European Parliament to attack the European Union. So here you see when the first European Union president was adopted, European Council president was named Herman van Rompuy, a former Belgian prime minister. He was the first president of the European Council, which was established with the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009. So here's Nigel Farage of the United Kingdom Independence Party in the European Parliament attacking Herman van Rompuy.
You have the charisma.
Okay, let me go back here to make sure you see it from the start.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I've never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy? Well, I sense though that you're competent and capable and dangerous. And I have no doubt that it's your intention to be the quiet assassin of European democracy and of the European nation states. You appear to have a loathing for the very concept of the existence of nation states. Perhaps that's because you come from Belgium, which of course is pretty much a non-country. But since you took over, we've seen Greece reduced to nothing more than a protectorate. Sir, you have no legitimacy in this job at all, and I can say with confidence that I can speak on behalf of the majority of the British people in saying, we don't know you, we don't want you, and the sooner you're put out to grass, the better.
So that was from 2010, 11 years ago, and the European Union would leave finally in the European Union in January of last year, 2020. All right, and then just to continue on with this reminiscence of the European Union, here is Herman van Rompuy responding in French. Remember, Belgians, particularly leaders, can speak in Belgian and in Dutch, and he is responding at the same year to Nigel Farage in French language, not in English, and that's on purpose, of course. So here you hear him speaking.
Donc, cette ambition européenne que j'ai retrouvée ici cet après-midi, je me réjouis de cette...
The English translation is not available in this clip. President of the European Union states here, and it was that where is the text of his comment is here. It used to be here, where basically he rejects. Oh yes, here it is. Okay, so here's the translation of what he says in English, and he mocks Nigel Farage speaking in French, and he highlights the achievements of the European Union at the time of the sovereign debt crisis. Remember, this is during the time of the financial crisis, and Greece is in danger of defaulting on its loans that it had purchased on European world bond markets, and the European Union is having a financial crisis, and the world is going into the deep recession that would last until 10 years ago. And he says it was an achievement of the European Union that the member states of the European Union are not engaging in cutthroat competition, each competitively devaluing their currencies like they did prior to the euro, where countries, and like you still see today happen sometimes, not as intense, like the Koreans complain about Japan devaluating or cheapening the value of the Japanese currency, the yen, so that their exports become cheaper and they take more market away from South Korean company exports, so that Sanyo takes market share from Samsung by making Sanyo Japanese products cheaper by making their currency less expensive. But before, of course, in Europe before World War II, that was quite common. All of the time, these countries would manipulate their currencies to try to undercut each other. And he's saying, we're not doing that. We're showing solidarity. We're working together with the people of Greece. And so it does not look like much of the way that Russian dissident was portraying the European Union just a few years earlier. But before I forget, let's go to the cyber campus and do the cyber campus attendance and policymaking in the European Union, add smart attendance, and your number is 790. 790 is your smart attendance number. So let me go here and put in the chat 790. And there you go. 790 is your smart attendance number. And all right, so let me go back to my lesson plan. And if I have to find the lesson plan and to remind myself what I want to do, what we want to do today. And here's the Wikipedia entry for that Russian dissident who died last year, but was well known and who disliked the European Union. As I said, he got arrested for child porn. But but anyway, back to the okay. So you wrote. Let me see. I have to always remember to keep checking that you can share. I can share the screen. You can see what I'm looking at because I like you to be able to look at what I'm looking at. And okay, so the debate topic for this week is to South Koreans, at least one additional European Union member state will probably leave the European Union. And let us start off with the debate then. And so let me stop the share, go back to breakout rooms and make, well, we have 2 rooms. And so I will assign you manually, and we have one room will be pro and one room will be con. And let's see, assign to pro will be Marie, and con will be con as well. Pro and will be, I'm sorry, I messed that up. You are con. So rename is no, not assigned. So Marie is con, and Kang Tong-un is con. And pro, we have Own Tech. And we had somebody join late, so UJE will also be pro. And so prepare your statements, since you wrote paragraphs on the question as to whether or not you think at least one other country at some point in the future will leave the European Union. So join your groups, and let's see who's going to speak for the group. So let me flip a coin. Heads, it's the first person. Tails is the second person listed. And so let me flip the coin. And I don't know, I think you can't see me if I have that. So make sure you join those groups. And it is heads. So the first person listed in the group. So Own Tech will speak for pro and Marie will speak for con. So join your groups, and prepare your statement as to whether or not well, you think, and why you think the at least one other country, Poland, Hungary, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, whatever, you think will eventually leave the European Union. And let me close that because I think you can't see me if I don't close the breakout room window. So heads, I am pro. Tails, I am con. And flip the coin. And I'm pro. So I will write a pro statement. And I will do that now. So help your designated speaker prepare for their statement. And explain why, of course. What is the scenario you imagine? Okay. Okay. All right, I got a good statement. And again, like I told you before, one of the reasons why I like to do these kinds of exercises because it makes me think through what's in my head. And so I learn from them as well. So let me go to the breakout rooms and you have a minute. Okay, so pro is heads, tails is con. Who will speak first? And it is tails, so con will speak first. And that's Kang Tong-un. Kang Tong-un, why did you argue, why do you argue, why does your group argue that no other countries will leave the European Union?
As I'm reading in textbook, the EU gained new prestige and evolved in fundamental ways after the big events such as the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. Also, the EU is the second largest exporter and importer, is larger than the US, so the European members would not give up the profit from it easily. So under COVID-19 pandemic, I think the EU will overcome a difficulty together. So
Yeah. Well, so of course, you know, anyone would hear your statement would then ask, well, why didn't the same incentives apply to Britain? Why did Britain leave the European Union if for all of those same reasons to stay in the European Union applied to Britain? Why did Britain leave? Think about it. You can think about it.
I think Britain was focused on doing more cost-saving solutions, and that they could like get into more trade barriers of their own.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's these rational arguments about they're going to make, you know, they're going to have more efficiency by leaving the European Union. I don't know. I mean, I think it's more emotional. And then, of course, rationalization in terms of people justifying what they want to do by making themselves engage in what we call in psychology wishful thinking or motivated reasoning or a cognitive balancing. So if you desperately want your Great Britain out of the European Union, you don't want people to call you dumb and passionate and emotional. So you'll come up with a rationalization. Now, economically in the long term, Britain will benefit more by leaving the European Union because, you know, people don't like to be called irrational. People don't like to be called emotional. You know, people want to be perceived as being thoughtful. So, yeah, I mean, pro-Brexit people made that argument that Britain is being held down by continental Europe, by being obligated to follow with the rest of the European Union, when Britain could become, what was the term they called it? You know, Singapore, the city-state here in Asia that is such a hub of international trade, that Britain will become the Singapore on the Thames. The Thames River goes through London, that the United Kingdom will become the Singapore on the Thames as a result of Brexit, because they will have more freedom of maneuver and opportunity to take advantage of world economic opportunities without having to, you know, agree with the other 27 member states of the European Union. And Britain will become the Singapore on the Thames River. Now, we'll see, most economists, not all, but most economists saying this is a mistake. Over the long term, Britain's going to pay for this. We'll see what happens, but it's a matter of lost opportunities. Britain will still, economy will still grow. It's just that it may not grow as fast as it would otherwise if it stayed in the European Union, not to mention join the Eurozone. London is a center of international finance. How much of those businesses from in Britain are going to, in the financial industry, are going to move from the city of London to Paris, for example, where now that Britain is no longer in the European Union, not to mention in the Eurozone. I'm an old man, right? So I remember back in the 1970s when Britain was having serious economic comparative difficulties compared to Germany and France and Italy, and people were talking about the German and the Italian and French economic miracles, and Britain was still growing economically in the 1960s and 70s, but only 1 or 2% a year, whereas Italy and Germany were growing at 6, 7, 8% a year. And Britain is just growing at 1 or 2% a year. And US was having similar economic problems, and commentators in the media talked about the Anglo-Saxon disease, that the Anglo-Saxons, Britain and the United States, have low economic growth rates because they're so inefficient and bureaucratic compared to dynamic Japan and dynamic Germany and France and Italy growing at 6, 7, 8% a year. Woo! That's the way they talk about Japan, right? And they talk about the Anglo-Saxon disease or the Anglo-Saxon malady. It was in that context that the United Kingdom joined the European the European Economic Community in 1973, finally, right? And then, of course, we talked about how under British nationalist government under Margaret Thatcher, major reforms were changed, and suddenly Britain became the fastest growing big economy in Europe and passed Germany and France and Italy. I remember, and when I was in high school in the 1970s, Italians were like, yeah, according to some economic measures, this is by 1978, 1979, I remember reading in Time magazine, according to some measures, the Italian economy was now bigger by gross domestic product than the British economy. Yeah, yeah. This was Britain that Margaret Thatcher inherited. Right. So will we go back to that in the 2020s, 2030s, 2040s, that Britain will still grow, but at 1 or 2 or 3% a year, whereas the European Union, particularly the Eurozone, will grow at a faster rate economically than Britain? I don't know. But the consequences of Britain leaving, if there's negative consequences or positive consequences, we're not going to know for years, because it's going to take years to show the economic trends, right? And so, but I went off on a tangent there. So Owen Tech, speaking for Khan. No, you're pro. You're pro. So why, Owen Tech, do you think a country will leave the European Union?
We couldn't come up with a clear decision, just as Britain recently withdrew from the European Union. There would be other countries trying to leave the Union if it would benefit its own interest. Meanwhile, just as France suffered huge economic losses at the AUKUS, which was launched not long after Britain's withdrawal, the European Union has confirmed that it is not the top priority for US cooperation. In this situation, we thought that European Union countries would unite on their own to strengthen cooperation.
UJE, do you have anything to add? UJE, if not?
Just as Britain withdrew from the EU, I think other countries will leave if they benefit them. However, particularly political and constitution questions arising from voting through Brexit can open an era of uncertainty. Also, leaving the EU will prevent the country from growing. The magnitude of the impact depends on factors such as trade, productivity, and foreign direct investment. However, Brexit advocates can think differently. And also, I think it could cause damages to countries in the European area, in the European unions. That's my thought.
Okay, you know, I think, again, I told you before, one of the reasons why I like doing these kinds of exercises, because it makes me think through what I want, what's in my head when I have to write down a statement. So I wrote down a statement as well, and I had to flip a coin, and the coin told me to be pro. So I had to write a pro statement. So what I learned from this exercise is that you have to, it's good to think in terms of future political scenarios, future political imagined futures. You have to, in terms of explaining how a country could leave the European Union, you have to try to explain to me a scenario, a series of events of cause and effect that caused that to happen. And by the way, I should tell you, there is discussion in Poland among the supporters of the Law and Justice militant populist party, nationalist party in charge now of the government, about a Polexit. They're upset about the European Union pressuring them to not take action against the former communists and their children and grandchildren, who they view as traitors and treasonous actors who benefited from the evil Russian Soviet communist occupation, the way the Chin-il-pa benefited from the evil Japanese occupation in Korea, right? And so the Law and Justice Party that now is in charge of the government in Poland and is also holds the presidency of Poland, wants to change the judicial system and control the judge system in Poland to allow more action to be taken against those children and grandchildren of the communist collaborators with the evil Russian and Soviet communists who are now, benefiting from the wealth and prosperity that their fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers, through their treasonous collaboration with the communist Soviet Russians, benefited. And we talked about this before, right? There was something similar happened here in Korea when what was the president? Was a president right before Lee Myung-bak became president in 2010. They tried to do the same thing in Korea. They tried to take the land and wealth that belonged to the grandchildren of the Chin-il-pa, who collaborated with the Japanese, who are rich today because their grandparents collaborated with the Japanese, and they passed a law to take that land, some land from some families. I think it was over 100 million pounds, British pounds worth of property, like $150 million. And who stopped them? Who stopped the government from taking that land? The Korean courts. The South Korean courts said, no, you can't do that. And that was, I think, in 2015. I'll have to look it up. I looked it up recently on the internet, but I don't have it ready to show it to you now. The Korean courts stopped that. And the same thing was going on in Poland. The Polish courts are stopping the government from expropriating the wealth and benefits that the children and grandchildren of the supposed collaborators with the evil Russian Moscow Soviet occupiers benefited from. And so the European Union is pressuring the Polish government, if they continue to try to change the laws to allow the government to control the judges in Poland more effectively. And so there's been some talk about Poland leaving the European Union in the media. So we'll see what comes of that. But you can look for these comparisons in terms of South Korea and Poland, because you Koreans understand the sensitivity of this topic the way the Polish people understand the sensitivity of this topic. Why should the grandchildren of collaborators still be rich and prosperous and powerful today because their grandparents were serving the Japanese who wanted to erase Korea? So you get emotional when I talk in those terms, don't you, Koreans? Well, you understand how the Poles feel and why the Law and Justice Party continues to do well politically in elections in Poland. This legacy of the Cold War, right? I keep coming back to this, right? So this is my statement here. Poland or Hungary will probably leave the European Union because the European Union will steadily increase its opposition to the United States. After the Republican Party in the United States, Donald Trump and the Republicans, will take back control of the US government from the Democrats under Joe Biden. France and Germany will more closely integrate their militaries to be more autonomous or independent from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which the United States controls, right? Which will infuriate Poland and Hungary. Poland and Hungary, like the United Kingdom, will still remain in NATO, of course. Even if they leave the European Union, they're not going to leave NATO, just like the United Kingdom is not leaving NATO. And they will, and Poland and Hungary will encourage more U.S. military base deployments in Poland and Hungary. They will ask the Americans, please put more of your troops in Poland and Hungary in permanent bases. U.S. military bases will move out of Germany, like they did from France in the 1960s. So there used to be American military bases in France, but under Charles de Gaulle, we talked about President Charles de Gaulle in France. He wanted to play a more autonomous, independent role in the world, and he pulled France out of the military system of NATO. And the Americans had to leave. The American military bases all closed in France that had been there since World War II. And then Poland and Hungary. So I think in this scenario, if Donald Trump and the Republicans take back power of the U.S. government after the next future elections, which they could, then there's going to be more of a push for the U.S. to act in ways that are going to irritate the Germans and the French, and the Germans and the French will cooperate more closely, and this will irritate in return the Polish and the Hungarians, because the Poles in particular, they view their relationship with the United States as more important to their security than any kind of promise from Germany after, what Germany did to them in World War II, and the fact that Germany's relatively pacifistic. So Poland and Hungary value their alliance with the US as the most important for their well-being. So I can imagine that scenario happening. If Donald Trump becomes president again, or somebody who's an offspring of Donald Trump, or a follower of Donald Trump becomes president of the United States and starts acting like Donald Trump did. And this will make the Germans become more receptive to the French words, to the French pleas to develop the European Union's own military capabilities so that it is not so dependent upon the United States military capabilities. Because right now, that's always been France's main obstacle to its words over many decades, over the decades, to increase its military capabilities. It's the Germans that resist. It's the Germans that always resist, right? Because the Germans view their relationship with the United States absolutely critical to their position in Europe. One of the main reasons why the Polish people and the Hungarian people and all of the people of Europe tolerate Germany and German influence is because the United States is there. So anything that pushes the United States away from the European Union, the Germans refuse to support it. So as I told you, the French for years, for 25 years at least, if not more, have been calling for the European Union to develop its military capabilities because the French are not so trustful of the Americans. And the European Union never does it. They never move in that direction, primarily because the Germans say, no, we must keep our alliance with the United States. And they continue to say it up through last year. But there are limits. If Donald Trump or a Donald Trump type figure becomes president in the United States, they might not have much choice. So by the way, I wanted to show you this because it confirms some of the points I made about Charles de Gaulle and France being upset about Britain, United States, and Australia forming a new defense alliance called AUKUS. What is it? Australia, United Kingdom, US, AUKUS, to develop Australian. Hold on, I gotta make sure you can see that screen. To develop Australian nuclear-powered submarines using American technology and British technology, but not French. I don't think the French have nuclear-powered attack submarines. I've never read or heard of the French having any nuclear-powered submarines. I don't even know if they could build them. I mean, they'd have to design them. but the British and the Americans have them. They've had them for decades. So, and this is an old opinionator and editor and journalist for the New York Times. He said what really angered the French, what really got the French seeing red was something else. It wasn't the abolition of the arms agreement with Australia itself. It was being callously shunted aside by the United States and its Anglophone allies. Les Anglo-Saxons, as General Charles de Gaulle somewhat disparagingly referred to the British and the Americans, and being excluded from a role in what is shaping up to be the central geopolitical action for decades to come. That means here, Asia. Here again, another reference to Charles de Gaulle. Never did the Anglo-Saxons really treat us as real allies, de Gaulle explained at one point, asserting France's grandeur and global role against the Anglo-Saxons meant withdrawing from the NATO military command structure in 1963 and expelling Allied forces from France, even while remaining in the alliance politically and diplomatically. But the Americans had to close their military bases. It meant twice vetoing Britain's membership in the precursor to the European Union, that was the European Economic Community. And it meant thumbing his grand nose at the Anglo-Saxons on several notable occasions, like exclaiming, "Vive le Québec libre! Long live free Quebec!" while on a state visit to Canada, prompting his visit to be cut short. And that, of course, encouraged Quebec nationalism in Canada among the French-speaking population in Quebec and Canada. And twice Quebec has had a referendum on whether or not to leave Quebec. And the instigation or support or encouragement for Quebec French Francophone nationalism in Canada is attributed to Charles de Gaulle coming to Canada and making that statement while he's in Montreal, "Vive le Québec libre!" And the Canadians, of course, the English-speaking Canadians didn't appreciate that. Or assailing the American intervention in Vietnam in a famous speech in 1966, even though, of course, you know, the French were the first ones to lose a war there. Or insisting that France develop its own force de frappe, or strike force. So France developed its own nuclear military force under Charles de Gaulle, nuclear missiles, nuclear aircraft carrier, nuclear bombs to put on top of those missiles. And this is, of course, after the British did that in the 1950s with the help of the Americans. France decided under Charles de Gaulle that France would have a nuclear force as well. The Anglo-Saxons had their own doubts about de Gaulle. He was not invited to join Joseph Stalin, Franklin Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill at the Yalta Conference, and Roosevelt for a time refused to recognize him as head of a liberated France. And remember, I told you last week about how American nationalists were very upset about France not agreeing to support the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, when the Americans asked for France and the European allies to support a United Nations Security Council resolution to be passed by Britain, France, United States, Russia, and China to support an American-led invasion of Iraq. Now, the Americans knew that the Russians and the Chinese would be a problem, but they didn't expect France to veto a UN Security Council resolution authorizing the invasion of Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 2003. And times have changed, but frictions have continued to resurface occasionally. Think freedom fries, right? Back in 2003, when French opposition led American populists to demand that Americans stop calling French fries, but call them freedom fries, and stop calling French toast, and call it freedom toast, and boycott French champagne. And by the way, it's not mentioned here, but I was, of course, following this issue closely. And after this conflict with France and the United States, or Paris and Washington occurred at this time, American foreign direct investment in France in this time, right after 2003, dropped. I think I recall 70% drop in foreign direct investment in France by it's either by American or all international corporations. FDI, foreign direct investment, dropped in France by 70%. I have to check. It might have been American corporations, but you can imagine, right, that if you're a business executive of an American company, a multinational corporation, you have plans for business strategy over the next 5 years for your company. Here's a plan to invest in France. Here's a plan to invest in Brazil. And here's a plan to invest in Taiwan. Which one am I going to approve for my company? Oh, there's this conflict with US, between France and US over the US-led invasion of Iraq. I think we'll put this plan aside for a while. So France paid an economic price because the world business community saw all of this conflict between US and France. And it goes on here. More recently, Donald Trump effectively confirmed many of France's stereotypes of the ugly American. Mr. Trump initially showed a certain chumminess with President Emmanuel Macron, but that fell apart over Mr. Trump's display of disdain for Europe and the NATO alliance, leading Mr. Macron to question America's commitment to Europe and to declare, what we are currently experiencing is the brain death of NATO, because Donald Trump was not willing to provide leadership to NATO. And just to go on here, I'm not going to read the whole editorial, but I just wanted to show you these references to freedom fries and the Anglo-Saxons. Yet Mr. Macron is not General de Gaulle. The French president knows the limitations of French power and the ways of realpolitik, and he's not likely to take the squabble any further. Mr. Biden, too, will seek ways to make up to France, and the world will keep turning. For all the recurring talk of making Europe more militarily independent of the United States, there is little likelihood of a major change anytime soon. And there's little likelihood of a major change anytime soon because the Germans always say, "Adio, nein, niet, no." They won't agree to it. So let me go back to the debate question and ask you to vote, so I don't forget to vote on the debate question. So please vote on the debate topic. To at least to South Koreans, at least, and that including Kyrgyz, to South Koreans, at least one additional European Union member state will probably leave the European Union at some point. So vote. So there's two. There should be two more votes. Two more votes. Marie, you need to vote. And UJE, you need to vote.
I just voted.
Okay. All right. So the class seems to be split down the middle. Okay. So we'll see. We'll see. But I mean, again, to emphasize, the point is to think about future scenarios, how something could happen. And when I was forced to think through that scenario, that's plausible to be believed that, again, the Germans always say no. And of course, now Biden is in office. President Joe Biden is the president of the United States. And he's saying, oh, America is back. We're going to provide leadership. But who knows what will happen in 2022? The Congress will probably, the Republicans will take control over the Congress, or at least one house of the Congress. Joe Biden, he's an old person. I don't know, I mean, is he going to get reelected in 2024? He'll be 80, I think 83 or 84 if he gets reelected in 2024. And so the point is that highlights the importance of understanding nationalism and American nationalism causing a shock to the vested bureaucratic and governmental vested interests in the United States and its allies, to cause a change that encourages other vested interests that are being built up. Because, as I said, the Germans have never been really enthusiastic about permanent and structured cooperation in the military field, but it's there. And it started a few years ago, and you read about it in chapter 15 of the textbook, right? And that will be encouraged further in a scenario in which, say, a Donald Trump type person becomes president of the United States again in 4 years. And okay, so let me go back to the exercise and ask you to, all right, so please respond to the following statement. This time, Germany will support France in committing the European Union to develop a European common security and defense policy to increase the European Union's diplomatic bargaining leverage with Washington, right? So given what we've been talking about, so let me go back to the stop share, go back to the breakout rooms, recreate, and assign automatically and recreate. And so those are the new two groups. So you are now in two separate groups, two new groups. And please join those groups, Kang Tong-un and Owen Tech together, and Marie and UJE together. And try to decide where you are going to be on this scale. Go back to share screen here, as to whether or not you think this time Germany will support France in committing the European Union to develop seriously a European common security and defense policy, including a European military. That they will move forward with their plans of the European Defense Community way back in the 1950s. Remember that idea to integrate the West German and French militaries that was rejected by the French Parliament. But this time, they will then move forward to integrate and develop a European common security and defense policy to increase the European Union's diplomatic bargaining leverage with Washington. So let me open up that file again that I showed you in terms of bargaining leverage, because this is really useful, I think, in helping us think through, and it's not about Lithuania and China this time, but how would developing European EU CSDP and US, how would that increase a CSDP, a strong European military, affect the diplomatic bargaining leverage between the United States and European Union? And I haven't done this yet. This is kind of thought exercise that we need to do. If the European Union convincingly demonstrated a real cohesive, integrated military, this would impress Russia. This would impress a lot of third countries, Ukraine, everybody, if the European Union really did it. I mean, the European Union would increase its ability to convince the United States that it doesn't need NATO to exist and to thrive, because that's the prevailing view, I think, in Europe, certainly in Berlin today. If you don't have NATO, you can't have the European Union, because NATO and American influence is necessary to keep the French and the Polish and the Germans not fearing each other, because the Americans are there. Now, it might be impossible to develop this. You might say, well, oh, sorry, I got to make sure you can see that. I mean, this perceived ability to influence third countries. It might not be possible to develop to convince everybody, yeah, we're for real. Yeah, we got a real European military, a real European army, a real European Air Force, a real European Navy. And we're going to use the French nuclear force de frappe. The French nuclear force will be our nuclear force, like the British have theirs and the Americans have theirs and the Chinese have theirs and the Russians have theirs. We've got the Europeans with the French. Yeah, and we have the ability to use force. Yeah, we don't need the American. We don't need America to make it possible for Europeans to kill people, because the Europeans did bomb and kill Libyans back in 2011 when under NATO. Denmark actually dropped bombs to kill Libyan army soldiers that were threatening Muammar Gaddafi's rebels who were rebelling against him during the Arab Spring in 2011. They killed people. So did the French and the British. The Germans, no. The Americans asked the Germans to do some bombing in Libya 10 years ago, and the Germans said no. They always say no. The Germans won't kill people anymore. They just won't do it after World War II. You know, the Americans can't get the Germans to kill anybody. Whether they be Taliban or Islamic State, the Germans won't kill anybody anymore, at least not until now. But the French, yeah, the British, yeah, the Danes, even the Denmark. I'm still trying to process that. The Denmark Air Force actually bombed and killed people in Libya to help overthrow Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. But that was under NATO. That wasn't under the European Union. Perceived willingness to alter relationship type, that if the European Union looks like a real cohesive military with a really strong common security and defense policy with an effective European army, that they could say, hey, America, if you're going to be a tough guy with us, we're going to ally with China, or we're going to ally with Russia. Ha, 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 ha. Because you see the word here, perceived, perceived, perceived. What do people believe? Perceived. Is it possible to do this? You could see if they were really succeed in developing a true European effective military capability, it would boost European Union diplomatic bargaining leverage towards the US, as well as towards everybody else. Russia, China, Brazil, Kyrgyzstan, South Korea, Belgium. But can they do it? I mean, if the Europeans went to war, would the Germans kill people as part of the European army, European Air Force? Would Germans and Italian soldiers fight and die if China occupied a French colony in Asia, right? That's one of the reasons why the French are so upset, because the French still have colonies. New Caledonia and French Polynesia, Tahiti, those are French colonies in Asia. There are thousands of French citizens who live in Asia, in the Pacific Ocean. And unlike the British don't have any colonies anymore. Well, I think they have British Samoa. There might be, I don't know if the British have any more colonies in the Pacific, but the French make that point. We live there. We have thousands of French citizens who live in French Polynesia, in Tahiti, which is the capital of French Polynesia, in New Caledonia. And so, the point I'm trying to make is that the French are upset that the Americans don't take them seriously in terms of Europe as an actor. And so, but this would be a big step for the Germans to say, okay, we're going to risk. It would have to happen in a scenario in which Donald Trump was perceived to have given the Germans no choice. That we can't. These Americans are crazy. Donald Trump's insane. America's going collectively crazy. We don't have a choice. We have to cooperate and work with the French, as the French have been requesting for many years, to develop the European Union's military capabilities. And so that we could tell the Americans, hey, man, if America goes crazy, you know, we don't need NATO. Can you imagine them doing that? Can you imagine, you know, as I said, the Germans and Italians fighting if China tries to occupy a French colony in the Pacific Ocean? In some scenario, science fiction scenario. That's how you have to think. And that's the value of a good theory. You know, this is a good theory. I mean, this comes from this framework, right? In terms of, again, I mean, these are those bargaining levers. How do those are created? And the point I just want to emphasize here is that the perception you have of a country's motivations always shapes your reaction to that country's efforts to influence you, right? An initiator country, if an initiator country is seen as an imperialist great power, imperialist threat, then if it offers you economic aid, like if China offers aid to Kyrgyzstan, Kyrgyzstan's government has to decide, are we going to take China's economic offer? Or does that mean that China is going to try to control us through its economic wealth? What are China's ultimate economic incentives for offering Kyrgyzstan economic aid? And that will shape how the Kyrgyz government responds to China's efforts to influence Kyrgyzstan by offering Kyrgyzstan access to Chinese economic resources, economic market, to export Kyrgyz exports to China, and so on. And if you're China, you know this. So you see, for example, China and Russia collaborating more closely together in the Central Asia Treaty Organization. The Shanghai Organization is an organization that involves Russia and China and Central Asian countries like Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan, partly to persuade those countries that they're not under risk of being under economic domination of China, big, powerful, rich, close China, because Russia's there as well. But I'm going off on a tangent here. But you know, it's going to take a lot of effort to try to convince me and you that, yeah, these Europeans, they'll fight. They'll fight the Chinese if the Chinese invade a French colony in the Pacific Ocean. Italy and Germany and Belgium and Denmark, they'll send soldiers and the Navy, and they'll fight and die. Yeah, are you really going to make, how are you going to make them believe that? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. You see this word, perceive, 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 perceive. So where do you fit on the scale then? Do you think that this time, oh, I should show you, I mean, I'll show you now. There are writers for the French press, the French commentators are saying, no, oh, it's different this time. Oh yeah, sure. This time it's happening. This time the Americans have pushed the French too far. The Americans have pushed the French too far. So let me show you this editorial. Of course, I got to show it to you in the New York Times here. It came out, I think, yesterday by a French writer claiming that this time, yeah, it's just for real. This is a real conflict that the Americans are gonna pay for this. Let me see if I can find it here, just to show you. I'm not going to go through it all. I think it was yesterday's. Yes. So view issue. You can see me going to the database of ProQuest. And if as soon as it comes up here, I'll show you this French commentator said this time the French are really angry. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, this is different. Yeah. Let me see if I can find it here. I thought it was here. Oh, I can't. Maybe it wasn't. Or maybe it was. Let me see if it was the previous issue. Next previous issue. 1 second. I just want to show you a French commentator saying, "Oh, this time, yeah, this is a crisis." Oh man, I can't find it. Maybe it was the next issue. Next issue. I'm trying to find the article. There was a French commentator said, this time, this is a real crisis in French-American relations. And it's going to be different this time. I mean, the Americans have really pushed it too far. And if I can't find it now, I'll show it to you next week. I mean, that's just one commentator's comments. But as a French writer in English who claims this is real. This is a real crisis in American-French relations. And it's going to cause a change. And I'm not going to be able to find it now because, but I'll have to look for it. Yeah, this is the one. And she's a French writer. This is an opinion editorial, right? This is her opinion. It says here, Sylvia Kaufmann is the editorial director and former editor of the chief of Le Monde, which is the main newspaper in France, right? And she makes that argument. This is real. Yeah, this is a real crisis. This is not, we're not going to go back to the way things were after. Oh yeah. But it means you got to get the Germans, the French. Paris has to get Berlin to agree that they're going to start publicly risking greater conflict with Washington by developing their military, because you can't hide developing your military. You're not going to hide that. You can't hide that. You're going to have to start buying more weapons. You're going to stop buying American weapons and buying European-made and develop new weapons. You're going to have to integrate your military commands. You're going to have to keep information from the Americans that you wouldn't keep in the past away from them. France's fury goes beyond the submarines. France's fury. Ooh. So is this really a crisis? So where do you fit on this scale? And so I think I opened up the rooms already, didn't I? Okay, so join those rooms and come up to a position as to where you are on these on the scale. Join the rooms. Kang Tong-un, Owen Tech, Marie, Kang Tong-un, join the room. Okay, so decide where you fit on the scale. And I'll flip the coin again. Heads, I'm 1, 2, or 3. Tails, I'm 4 or 5. I'm 1, 2, or 3. Heads, I'm 1. It's tails. Heads, I'm 2 or 3. Heads, I'm 2. And it's heads, 2. So this time, okay, I was told to write agree. Admiral Lee of the 100 won coin told me to write agree. Okay, you know, everybody puts a lot of resources in making the Wikipedia page really nice. And so I just wanted to show you also the Wikipedia page that the Europeans have for the Common Security and Defense Policy. And I can see I haven't opened up Wikipedia yet, so let me do that. If I can find my, okay, so okay, there it is. Okay, share. So here is the nice Wikipedia page for the Common Security and Defense Policy of the European Union. And see, they got their signature, they got their insignia already, and they got their little funky things here, and they got a website. Yay, they got a website. And so, oh yes, so this is of course the proposal way back in 1954 to create the European Defense Community that didn't go further after the French Parliament voted it down. So this is a cover from Time magazine about the proposal to integrate their military, and that didn't go anywhere. But maybe they'll restart it. Well, they are restarting it, but maybe this will accelerate. So, and the framework for organizing their efforts, like in purchasing military hardware and the like, is the permanent structured cooperation. Permanent structured cooperation is the heart of the European Union's security and defense policy, in which 25 of the 27 national armed forces pursue structural integration. I think Denmark has opted out. You can see Denmark is not in that. And Malta, little Malta. These two countries are not part of PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation. Denmark and Malta. But the other countries have agreed to cooperate, but it's not really done very much. But maybe it will accelerate. And so you can see, and they set up a defense fund to begin organizing how they're going to purchase but again, military manufacturing is very important for these economies. I mean, 10%. I saw one report from 5 years ago, 10% of the US manufacturing capacity of its US economic manufacturing is committed to defense production. So this is a major issue. If the Europeans are going to cut back on purchasing American military technology to develop and buy their own, that would be part of this. It would be a critical part of this. So let me stop share and go back to breakout rooms. All right, so yeah, 1 minute. And who will speak for room 1? Heads is the first person listed. And it's heads, so Kang Tong-un and Marie will speak for their rooms. Okay, so back to the exercise. And who will speak for just a second here? I think you can see that, right? You can see that, huh? I just make sure, share screen, back here, share. All right, so who will speak first? Heads, Kang Tong-un?
Sir,
Yeah.
it's too fast, so I can't understand.
I speak too fast?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to slow down. So Kang Tong-un will speak, heads is Kang Tong-un, tails is Marie, and it is Kang Tong-un. Where do you fit on this scale? Where does your group fit on this scale?
We have similar ideas.
Mhm.
In my opinion, Joe Biden will attend to this summit next month in Europe, and he tried to solve the conflict of the launch of the AUKUS by calling the French President Macron.
Yeah.
Yeah. So since the UK belongs to the AUKUS, so Germany as de facto leader of the EU, so Germany will support France in this situation, I think.
Yeah, but I think, what's probably, I mean, what the media in the New York Times and other observers are commenting, and by the New York Times is really important because the New York Times pretty much sets the agenda for all US media coverage in the United States. It's almost as if it seems that everybody else opens the New York Times newspaper and decides what they're going to cover, what they're going to report on, because it's been covered by the New York Times. So the New York Times is claiming that they think that the Americans will give some kind of benefit to the French somehow. They'll make some kind of concession on something else. I don't know what, maybe some kind of, but something with economic benefits for France. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, Sylvia Kaufman is saying, "Oh no, the French it's not about economics. And that's what other people make the point. It's the French military sale of the conventional diesel-powered submarines. It was going to rely primarily. It wasn't going to make that much economic benefit for France. They're going to buy American military technology, and the Australians are going to build the submarines and in their own ports." I mean, so and that French deal, which was already outdated anyway, because with the Americans wanting to focus more concern on China, they want the French to have better submarines that have nuclear power, so they can stay underwater for weeks at a time. If they use diesel fuel, they have to come up after 2 weeks. Nuclear submarines can stay underwater forever as long as you have food, enough food. They never have to surface. So how is Australia going to patrol off China's coast with diesel submarines? Like the Americans want Australia to have their submarines patrol off the coast of China. How are they going to do that with diesel submarines? Who else is in the group? Owen Tech, you have anything to add?
I think German will support France too, and I'm civil with her. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they'll go with whatever the French decide, and the French will be, I can imagine that the French are somehow going to be pacified in some way, that they'll be given some kind of, the Americans will agree to some kind of military cooperation with France in the Pacific Ocean. I mean, I don't know enough about French military deployments. I know the French, they were still testing and exploding nuclear weapons in New Caledonia in the Pacific Ocean above the ground on those islands. They're still blowing up nuclear bombs to test their nuclear technology, their nuclear weapons into the 1980s. So they've got military bases in the Pacific Ocean. So I can imagine the Americans making some kind of deal with the French where the French will also do something with the Americans in the Pacific Ocean, some kind of formal agreement. And Marie, what did your group decide?
We both find it hard to discuss like such a hard topic in such a short amount of time, but actually I do agree with the rest, and I think that they will support France.
Yeah, but I think what I was told to write agree by Admiral Lee. I agree. The Germans will upgrade their cooperation with the French in the permanent structured cooperation of the European security and defense policy in order to begin developing more European military technology. Like, I don't know, when was the last time the French upgraded their nuclear submarines? They have nuclear submarines. The French have nuclear submarines, and they have nuclear, but I've never heard the French, why wouldn't the French sell nuclear submarines to the Australians if the Australians wanted them? Maybe you cut that out. Or I can imagine the French cooperating with the Germans to develop the nuclear capabilities of France, because I don't know when the last time the French have upgraded or overhauled or reform or rebuilt their nuclear technology that they created, like their missiles. Maybe they'll do that with the Germans, because with the French still in charge, because everybody's nervous about Germany still because of its history. So they'll begin developing more European military technology. The French and Germans will also begin integrating the common military command structures, but it'll be slow and incremental, I think. So, but again, we'll see. So let me stop the share and ask you to vote. And on this question. So this time, let me see, I gotta make sure I'm sharing the screen. This time, Germany will support France in committing the European Union to develop a European common security and defense policy to increase the European Union's diplomatic bargaining leverage with Washington. So vote. Oh, yeah, I think the critical issue is here. Again, one of the reasons why I like doing these kinds of exercises, because it forces me to think through my own ideas, and it's because the French and the Germans might conclude that there are deep trends in changes in attitudes and values underway in the United States that go beyond Joe Biden. I mean, Donald Trump was elected. Donald Trump still dominates the Republican Party. one of the main two parties in the United States. He's still the most powerful Republican in the United States. We have to prepare, despite what President Joe Biden might say now or tomorrow or 2 years from now, we've got to prepare for a different United States. The United States is changing in terms of its values and attitudes of its mass public. And we cannot continue to rely so much just on the United States military security commitment to Europe. We can't. Because somebody like Trump may get elected, may well get elected again. And the way Joe Biden treated, that's what they're saying now. The way Joe Biden treated France is the same way Trump treated France and Europe. They say the only difference is that Joe Biden didn't send out tweets because Donald Trump likes to get on his cell phone and use Twitter. And it's like Donald Trump without the tweets is how the French foreign minister described America's behavior over the Australian nuclear submarine deal. So we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so let me go to the notes. And one of the points I want to make about the notes is that one of the lessons we learned from this discussion is that the European Union develops in response to crises. And these crises are international crises. Changes in the international environment change the nature of the European Union. The European coal and steel community began during the Cold War. European integration as a project gained new prestige and importance with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Oh, this is following the end of the Cold War. So the Cold War ended 30 years ago. And the world changed. And as the international political system changed, the European Union changed. The European Union began to prepare for expansion in Eastern Europe with the collapse of the Soviet communist regimes there. In 1992, the Maastricht Treaty was signed as the Treaty on European Union in response to these accelerating changes in Southeast Europe and the Balkans, and also in the Soviet Union itself. The European community member states decided, we've got to work for peace in Europe in a world in which these former communist countries are going through revolutionary change. They've got to go from communism to capitalism and democracy. Can you imagine North Korea changing very, very quickly in a space of a few years from going from North Korea to becoming like South Korea? That's what the Europeans faced in Eastern Europe when the communist regimes collapsed. And they were afraid. They were afraid that if they didn't give hope to these former communist people and these former communist countries, that they might get desperate and frustrated and elect vicious leaders out of frustration and disappointment at the tremendous stress and suffering following the collapse of 40 years of communism and communist economics and communist politics. I mean, communism might have not worked well, but it was what existed. You have to create something new now. And European enlargement, the promise of joining the European Union, gave these former communist states a blueprint, a plan, a model, a strategy as to what they needed to do to fix, to repair, to recover their countries that had experienced 45 years of communism, terrible economic deprivation, pollution, turmoil, crime. How can we fix Poland? How, as a citizen of Hungary, can I fix Hungary? As a citizen of Bulgaria, I love my country, but it's so corrupt. We don't know what to do to fix our country. We need to vote for a strong authoritarian leader who will put the criminals in jail. And they'll start talking in terms of putting a dictator in power. And the European Union said, wait, we will tell you what you need to do. You need to adopt all of the European Union laws. We will give you economic aid and assistance. It will be difficult. It will be complicated. It will take a long time, but you now know what you need to do to fix your country, to make your country European, to return to Europe. You want to become European again after 45 years of communism? You need to join the European Union. That will make Poland and Bulgaria and Romania European again. And Europe is cool. Europe is modern. Europe is prosperous. Europe is democratic. You want to be European? This is how you become European. Adopt the acquis communautaire. That's the French term for the 100,000 pages of European laws adopted since the European Coal and Steel Community. Incorporate that into Polish law, Bulgarian law, Romanian law, Lithuanian law. Incorporate all of that law into your laws, and implement those laws with an effective government and an effective civil service, and you will become European. Like the Germans, like the French, like the Belgians, like the Italians. It'll be difficult, it'll be hard, but this is what you need to do. So the European Union made a promise in the 1990s that after communism fell, that they needed to promise the East Europeans that they can join the European Union someday. And so they need to adapt the European community to the future enlargement of the European community in the name of creating the European Union. The institutional machinery of the European community at the time was for 12 members, which were all pretty much wealthy and prosperous, right? Austria, Finland, and Sweden, they joined the European Union in mid-1990s, but that was easy. They were already rich and prosperous countries. They were already economically integrated with the European community, even though they were not part of the European community. They were still part of the economy of Europe. That was easy. Bring in Austria and Finland and Sweden, that's no problem. But bringing in Poland, Bulgaria, well, that's going to be a challenge, because these are poor countries, former communist countries that have to reform everything. And the European Union needed to adopt new institutional changes so it could function as a big organization that now would go up to 28 members with the British in it. Croatia joined in 2013. So there was talk about, well, we need to create a European Union, and a European Union needs a constitution. Instead of just adopting new treaties, we need to be more politically unified. So let's have a constitution. And they developed, after 1992 Maastricht Treaty, they developed by 2004 the draft European Constitutional Treaty. The leaders of the European Union, including the future members from Eastern Europe. And guess what? The French voters in a referendum said, no, we don't want to create a United States of Europe. No, we don't want to let all of those Polish people and Hungarian people and Bulgarian people be able to come freely into France and take French jobs by being able to move freely within a bigger European Union. And that indicated the European Union leaders had gone too far. And so what was the response when the French and Dutch voters said no to this draft European Constitution? Was the Lisbon Treaty. The Lisbon Treaty that came into effect in 2009 and created, Herman van Rompuy was the first president of the European Council, and created a high representative for the foreign policy of the European Union, and other changes. The Lisbon Treaty is basically, 90% of it is the draft Constitution Treaty. It's just not called a Constitution Treaty. So today, your author Olson claims that the European Union is a very different actor from what it was back when it started. It's a powerful global actor, he claims. Professor Olson claims, is the world's second largest economy. It is larger than the United States economy. I don't know. You see, he says this in the book, and I don't know what he means by this. He says it is behind China, but larger than the United States. I checked that in the book, and I'm not certain why he writes that. It is the second largest exporter and importer in the whole world. It has a population of 450 million, which is larger than the US. Professor Olson says it has gained independence in its foreign policy. Maybe formal independence. I'm trying to imagine when the European Union has opposed the United States in foreign policy. I mean, in terms of really strongly opposed, they haven't. So the point is, this may be most important, that when the European Coal and Steel Community started in 1953, it was the European Coal and Steel Community. But today, in 2021, the European Union is Europe. In terms of people's thinking, people tend to assume that Europe and the European Union are the same thing. Is that really wise? Is Russia part of Europe? If Russia is part of Europe, then how can you say that the European Union is Europe? Because Russia says we don't want to join the European Union. So that means Russia is not European. When you look at the history of Russia, going all the way back to Peter the Great, 300 years ago, over 300 years ago. Over the past 10 years, a series of crises have exposed serious problems in the European project, but they have addressed them. And of course, the book was written and published before the COVID-19 pandemic's impact could be known by Olson. But again, this latest crisis, you see these crises that push the European Union to accelerate what it already agreed to do, to accelerate trends that were already set in motion earlier. And I think that's how, by the way, that's how people talk about the COVID. What's the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? People say, observers in the media say, the COVID-19 pandemic makes things that were happening happen even faster. So things that would have taken 5 or 10 years to happen, like using Zoom and internet for more work, so people don't have to be in the office for 5 days a week. Maybe that would have happened over 15, 20 years from now, but now it's happening now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that might well be one way to understand what's going on in the world, that crises accelerate what is already starting, but makes it happen faster before people expect it to happen. So when you read the book, right, there was not a decision made at the time when Professor Olson was writing that book that the European Union would create and sell Eurobonds on the international financial markets. They explicitly said no until the COVID-19 pandemic. And the Germans, and it's okay, yeah, we have to do this. This is a crisis, we have to do this. And they began in June, 3 months ago, which Olson doesn't talk about in the textbook. They've been talking about it, but now they did it because of the COVID-19 crisis. And they built upon what they already started in response to the previous crisis, namely the global financial crisis in 2007. It triggered a massive government debt crisis that exposed institutional weaknesses in the Euro system. And they responded by beginning to set up the framework for what is today a Eurobond financial banking system. And the European Central Bank that was already started in 1999, But as a result of the global financial crisis, the European Central Bank has now become one of the major institutions of the European Union. When Mario Draghi in 2012 said, we will do whatever it takes to prevent the Greeks from defaulting on their vast government debt. In other words, the European Central Bank will print euros to buy Greek bonds to fund the Greek government. Nobody's leaving the euro once they join. That was a big statement. And that happened in response to the crisis. And it wasn't planned in 1999 that the European Central Bank would ever do that. But in 2012, it did it. But the institutional framework had been established. The international migration crisis in 2014 exposed weaknesses in the European Union. And the European Union is trying to deal with that now because they're going to have another one with the refugees coming from Afghanistan. And this, of course, it also intensifies nationalism in these countries because the people living in Britain or in France, they see all of these people that don't look like Germans coming from Iraq and Syria with their different religions and their different facial appearances and their different clothes and their different food and their different ways of acting and their women wearing a hijab. And they go, I don't like that. The European Union has to respond. And of course, there are always political entrepreneurs in France, in Germany, in Italy, that exploit those mass public dislike for all of these non-Germans and non-Europeans coming into the country from Syria and Iraq and the Middle East and Africa. So these crises encouraged anti-EU populists throughout Europe. And we'll see what the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is. But it seems that emphasizing the euro and that even Marine Le Pen, France is in the Eurozone. She's not claiming if she wins the presidency in next year's elections against Emmanuel Macron, she's one of these European anti-EU populists, that she is not going to take the European France out of the Eurozone, out of the Europe, and not to mention out of the European Union. She just wants to limit migration. So the euro is really, really important. And, again, one of the reasons I like teaching the class is because I spend so much time looking at all these details. And again, this class so far this semester has just really indicated to me more fully the significance of the euro and European Economic and Monetary Union to create the euro. EMU, Economic and Monetary Union. That really is critical. And again, Poland and Hungary are not in the Eurozone. France is. So the Maastricht Treaty laid out the criteria under which EU member states may join the Eurozone. The leaders of the member states met in May 1998 to decide which states met the criteria. They decided that all but Greece were ready or were making good progress. The United Kingdom, Sweden, and Denmark, however, decided not to join the Eurozone, at least at its start. The European Central Bank became responsible for monetary policy in the Eurozone in June 1998, and in January 1999, the euro began. The participating states fixed their national currency exchange rates permanently to each other into the euro. So from then on, the value of the currency of the French currency, the Italian currency, a lira, the franc, the Deutschmark could not change. And then in 2002, they brought out the Eurozone paper and the Eurozone coins. So the physical conversion to the euro then also began, including they had to print 14 billion new euro banknotes. What's the design of those banknotes? The pictures on those banknotes could not be tied to any one country. They had to be general European themes. Keep in mind, 80% of your social life and my interaction with other human beings is economic. So what you picture you're going to put on those euro banknotes and on those euro coins, that's really important. And you want to convince people that they're Europeans. So the decision was to rely on different styles of architecture that existed throughout Europe. They had to mint 56 billion euro coins. One side was to have a common design. The other side would have themes from each of the member states, depending on where it was minted. So the Dutch, the Spanish, the Belgians selected images on the coins that reflected their respective kings and queens. Ireland went with the Celtic harp, which is something of an image for Ireland. France went with some mythical French mythological symbol for French liberty, Marianne. And Germany went with the federal eagle, the eagle that was adopted after World War II. And in January 1, 2002, businesses and consumers turned in their old banknotes and coins and received euros in return. And they had 6 months to do that in 2002. In reality, 95% of business in the Eurozone was already done in euros by the end of January of that year. And it was essentially complete by the end of February 2002. The Swedes and the Danes, they rejected entering the euro because the Swedish government and the Danish government insisted they had to have a vote of the people of Denmark and Sweden in a referendum. And they said no, because the mass of the population is more nationalistic than the leaders of the European Union. You know, the European Union doesn't want no more referendums. They haven't had a referendum since the 2009 Lisbon Treaty. No more referendum. All these big changes in Europe since 2009, since the Lisbon Treaty, from 2009 to 2021. Now, they've been done without referendums. No more referendums. Because the people will get scared and say, no! So don't ask them. The UK government under Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair also agreed to have a British national referendum on whether or not to join the Eurozone, and they never had it. Blair wanted to do it, but British public opinion didn't support it. So consequently, the referendum was never called, and instead they had a referendum on whether or not to leave the European Union, which passed by 52 to 48% of the vote. Slovenia joined the Eurozone in January 2007, little Slovenia on the border with Austria. Only 2.2 million people. Cyprus and Malta joined in 2008. Slovakia in 2009. Estonia in 2011. Latvia in 2014. And Lithuania in 2015. And you know, they're pro-German, they're anti-Russian. They used to be part of the Russian Soviet Union, and they're as republics, and they are always worried about that. And again, I think you can go to Wikipedia pages and look and see where there's always a Wikipedia entry on, for example, just a second, share screen. So you go here and Croatia. So I checked on this yesterday. So for example, I think you can see, I don't know if you can see, I have to share screen to make sure you can see that. So you can see here, it says here, Prime Minister Andrej Plenković stated in November 2020, so November last year, 10 months ago, that Croatia intends to adopt the euro on 1 January 2023. And the Croatian government adopted an action plan for the euro adoption later in December. So there's Croatia here. There's Slovenia, little Slovenia. Bulgaria is desperate to join the Eurozone. Please let us in, please, please. We want in the Eurozone. But the Europeans say, you Bulgarians are so, your country is so, your state is so weak, and the government is so ineffective and corrupt. Bulgaria officially joined the economic exchange rate mechanism on July 10, of last year, Bulgarian government central bank officials adopted a draft national plan for euro adoption on 30 June 2021, but they still haven't. Okay, they stated earlier that that Bulgaria's intention is to adopt the euro on 1 January 2024. What about Czech Republic? I think you can see this, right? Yeah, they're nervous. This is the Czech Republic. They haven't joined, and they don't talk about joining. And I think it's because of their bad history with Germans. That Germany gobbled up this country as part of the Austrian Empire, and then under Hitler in the late 1930s. Poland in the euro. They still have not moved to, you can see there is not yet any official information on the design process for post-national. It says, Euro adoption will require the approval of at least 2/3 of the Polish parliament to make a constitutional amendment changing the official currency from the zloty to the euro. The ruling Law and Justice Party opposes euro adoption. So, just they know that once you're in the euro, you're in for good. So back to the notes. The European Union has issues with, well, had before the pandemic, right? Issues with relatively high unemployment, particularly for young people like you, and how to make the economy grow faster to produce more jobs. But if you're going to loosen the restrictions on hiring and firing people and make the economy grow faster, you're going to have greater income difference between the rich and the poor, like you have in the United States or like you have in Britain. Yeah, sure, Britain's got low unemployment. Yeah, sure, America has low unemployment, but the rich are really, really rich and very, very small, and the poor are really big in Britain and the United States compared to France and Germany. To get to that point, the Maastricht Treaty came into force in 1993. They were preparing to expand the European Union to include the new members from Eastern Europe, and this is very difficult bargaining and negotiation among the current members. So they made some changes in the Treaty of Amsterdam in 1997 that came into force in 1999 to try to begin to prepare for expansion, but it really wasn't enough. They were unable, the member states of the European Union were unable to agree on major institutional reforms. They did agree to, pursue the launch of a single currency. That was going to go ahead. And this is a focus on, this is a key communautaire. This is the French term. It means community patrimony. It refers to all of the laws ever adopted by the European Union from 1952 to the present. If you want to join the European Union, you have to incorporate the acquis communautaire into your national laws. So if you're Turkey and you want to join the European Union, or Ukraine or Kyrgyzstan, you have to incorporate all of this. And it's about 100,000 pages in English. 100,000 pages of laws. And so I'm going to skip over that discussion of the European Union is always looking for, why is this? The European Union is looking for political allies, political friends within Europe, political friends within Europe who will support European integration. So the European Union has really made a commitment to gender equality, women's rights, because half the population is female. And if one of the estimations is that, you've got these anti-European nationalists, these populists. So the European Union has to find friends and allies within Europe. And so the European Union is really going to emphasize real equality for women and pushing gender mainstreaming and pushing for equal representation of women in corporate company director boardrooms and that's going to really encourage half of the European population to support European integration in the face of anti-European populists. That's one way to understand the European Union's really strong commitment to gender equality. I mean, and they put Ursula von der Leyen, the first female president of the European Commission. And he's done very purposefully. That we got to counter these anti-European people in Europe by making Europe appear to stand for gender equality. And that's particularly appealing to people like you and me who have global dreams, global aspirations, speak multiple languages. Maybe that's not so important to peasants living in the countryside, but it does appeal to college-educated women. And again, no more reference. So let me see. What do I have here in terms of other votes? Is that everything? Okay, well, yeah, I can't really. We'll go back to the notes just to finish up here. And so the next set of amendments to the foundational treaties were negotiated in the city of Nice in France in December 2000. And again, the changes are always incremental. They means they have to work with what already exists and change it a little bit because politically that's what's feasible. So you build on what exists, the institution that exists. You can't like redo everything unless there's a terrible crisis. And in 2000 December, there wasn't really a terrible crisis at this time. The world was good in December 2000, at least in Europe. This is several months, almost a year before the September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States. The economy is growing. The war in Kosovo was over. The world looked like a happy place, at least from a European perspective. So changes were incremental. Again, preparing for expansion out to the former communist countries. The size of the European Commission was increased so that each member state, including each future member state, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, would get one commissioner. Again, that was supposed to be cut back in the Treaty of Lisbon, but it's never been cut back because of nationalism. The weights of voting on the Council of Ministers among the countries was changed because of qualified majority voting. They put a cap on the number of seats in the European Parliament, about 750 was the limit on the size of the European Parliament. They agreed to changes in the European Court of Justice. And they started talking about a charter of fundamental rights of EU member states. And they started incorporating more human rights issues into the European Union laws and European Union treaties, which means the European Court of Justice would not only focus on business and trade laws, but the European Court of Justice is going to start focusing upon workers' rights, as well as employment rights for women, LGBTQ people. And this was an issue that really also irritated the Brexit people, the pro-Brexit people in the European Union. And it came into force in February 2001. And again, they were still doing referendums. So again, Ireland always has a referendum, has always had a referendum on each treaty. And this time they voted no. And they would vote no on the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009. But eventually they made changes and got it passed in 2003. And then they began negotiating the draft Constitution Treaty, which then failed. Okay, that's where I have to stop today. Any questions? If not, I'll see you next week. Bye.